Yes guys, what's going on? Speci here. Very nice to see you for the new expansion. We're going to be reviewing all the cards. If you want to see some Gwent content on expansion day, make sure you check out my Twitch, twitch.tv/Specimen. I stream pretty much every day and certainly will be for the new expansion. Like the video if you enjoy it, and if you're not subscribed, please do so. But let's begin. First of all, we have the Aretuza Student. In fact, let's start with our neutral cards. Alright, the first card is a neutral Vendra. She is on the melee row, going to set an allied scenario to the final chapter. On the range row, she's going to refresh the order of an allied location. So you can use this on your opponent's scenarios to skip the second chapter, or moreover, you can use it on your own thing. So for example, in Cloggers, you could clog an extra card of your location. For example, in Syndicate as well, you could get an extra poison move with the hideout. So Vendra, a neutral card. Bear in mind that is quite important because you can play her in all sorts of decks. You look at teleportation and Megascope, how much impact they've had. I think at 5 provisions, she's not going to be amazing. Like, she's not going to be something like Megascope you see in loads of decks, but she's still a really cool card. Mage tag as well, so I'm going to put her in Calm. All right, up next we have Verification, which was just revealed today. It's a spell card. Instantly, I love the sound of a spell card because I am a big fan of Alza. It's a neutral, of course, 6 provisions gold. You can only use one of these. Transform an artifact into an Elder Bear. If it's on your side of the battlefield, boost it by 4. Now, just bear with me while I put this rating in. I'm gonna put this one in Banger. Okay, it's gonna go lower Banger. The reason I'm putting it in Banger isn't necessarily for how good it is inherently as a card, but I just love the vibe of this, being able to turn your opponent's Masquerade Ball into a bear. Sounds very bloody satisfying. And in other decks as well, you can use this as just a 10-point card for 6 provisions on a lot of your cards. Very comparable to a Greatsword because you can play Megascopes and then you can transform that Megascope into a 10-point Elder Bear. Obviously, bears have got a little bit of synergy as well in SK, so yeah, I really love the vibe of this card. It's going to be hilarious to turn people's Masquerade Balls into a bear. But if we compare it to a Bomb Heaver would play for 4 points on your side of the board and remove an artifact, but then just play for 4 points flat if not finding an artifact, whereas this card plays for -6 points to remove an artifact, so that's 10 points worse than what a Bomb Heaver was. But if you're not doing that, it plays for 10 points, which is 6 points more than what a Bomb Heaver was. So it's an interesting take on having artifact removal. I think it's really nice to have some form of artifact removal that is not Heatwave, so I'm all for this card. It's going in the Banger tier. Really love the neutrals from this set. Alright, NR is up next. Quite difficult to evaluate some of these Northern Realms cards. I really love the Patience cards we've already got. The Bannard Student with Shani, really good at removing things. So the Aretuza Student working in a very similar way to the Bannard Student. It's going to be in the range row, boosting an allied unit, and it has Patience. So of course the Bannard Student is in the front row and does damage. So personally, I'm going to be prioritizing a lot of the time the Bannard Student for revives as well. Having that damage, being able to remove a Tunnel Draw or Koshti can be so useful. Boosting things not as useful. Of course, you've already got things like the Carrack Marine, Radovid's Roar Guards that can do this. So I do think it's a little bit worse. However, I still think it's a pretty good card. And as a result, I'm going to put it right at the bottom of Banger. I think most people are probably expecting this to be in the Calm tier right at the top. Maybe we'll start with it there and we'll see if we can justify putting it right at the bottom of Banger, because I do think the card is just quite powerful inherently, and I think I could see it being included in quite a few Northern Realms decks. It's 4 provisions, has a really high ceiling. I'm going to put it lower Banger. I think to have such a high ceiling for a 4 provision card, okay, Bannard Student is probably better, but that just shows how good Bannard Student is, I think. Alright, up next, the other 4 provision card, Practice Makes Perfect. So it's a spell card, so it's going to work with Alza, obviously Spell Weavers as well. Gain a charge whenever you play a Mage or a Spell Weaver. This is going to be triggering them twice, 3 times if played off Triss Telekinesis. And what this card does is it shuffles a Bronze Mage to your deck and play a random Bronze Mage from your deck. Boost the unit you played by 0, but increase the boost by 1 for each Patience unit you played this game. So if I play 4 Patience units, obviously there's Gerhardt, there's the Students, there's also Istrid. If you play loads of those, you can get maybe 6, 7, 8 points on this card. So you're boosting something by, more realistically, like 4 or 5, and then you're going to be shuffling a Bronze Mage away and putting one back. Now, the problem with this card is there aren't exactly that many good targets to shuffle away. You don't have low power cards. Things like the Merlin card, the Students, they're at 4 power, so shuffling those away feels a little bit bad. Okay, you might boost them by a little bit, but that doesn't feel particularly great. You're really going to be needing spell synergy, I think, to make this card work. I do love the design of it, though. I just worry that there's not exactly enough support for it. Maybe in the patch notes we might see some cards, other mage cards get like a lower base power and a higher deployability. Things like the Banner Tutor, currently 2 power, boosting by 4. Maybe that could be made like 1 power boost by 5 as an example. That could be really cool. So we'll have to wait and see. But definitely a card I think that doesn't look great right now, but I could see being a lot better down the line. So for the moment, I'm going to put this card in not popping off. I definitely don't think it's a stinker. I think moving forwards, it could be a really cool card. I just don't think the support for it is there as it stands. But I do love the design of this one, I have to say. All right, up next, Leticia. I think this is probably the card I'm most excited about in the Northern Realms set. Obviously, Aretuza Student good, but we've already kind of had it and just said that I don't think Practice Makes Perfect is quite doing it yet. But Leticia sounds just like a real powerhouse, exciting card. What she's doing is she's a Patience card of her own. So she's going to be synergizing, obviously, with Practice Makes Perfect and all in on the Patience cards. And at the end of this turn, she is going, when you use her order, which is got Patience value of all allied units is increased by 1 instead. So with Leticia, you play her down. She's going to be at Patience 2 the first time you can click her, because unless you're playing Inspired Zeal, which maybe could be an option, all your Patience is going to increase by 2. So if you've got your students down, if you've got your Banner Tutors, your Gerhardt, rather than their Patience increasing by 1 at the end of the turn like it usually does, it's going to go up by 2. So that's really bloody cool. And obviously you could get Patience 4 or 5 on this, and that would mean your Gerhardt could jump from Patience 4 to Patience 9 in one go. So I think that's really cool. I'm going to put Leticia in the absolute geezer tier. Now, I know this is going to be controversial because she's not a card that a lot of people are looking at in Northern Realms. That's Northern Realms maybe has the worst cards, but this is the card I'm most excited to try. I think it's going to be a card that's going to be really fun to use, and when things are going well, it's going to be a blast. So I'm putting it probably right at the bottom of absolute geezer tier, but I love it. I'm a big fan. Alright, last but not least, in Northern Realms, we have Tissaia. She's 6 power, 12 provisions. I've already given my thoughts on this card, that I think she's a bit win more. When things are going really well for you, when you've got all your engines sticking, she's going to be absolutely going ham. More than popping off, she's going to be huge. But in a match you're struggling, in a match where all your engines are being removed by drills, by locks, all these sorts of things, she's going to be a real wet noodle. I'm unfortunately not a big fan of this card. I don't really see her being seeing any competitive play. I'm going to put her in, I'm not going to put stinker tier, because I am going to give her a spin, and she is going to be amazing in certain situations. Decks like Koshji that don't have a complete abundance of removal, she can do really well in a greedy meta. I could see her doing great, but ultimately against Enslave, lined pockets, decks that Northern Realm struggles against, she is going to be terrible most of the time. So she's going to go in not popping off. Yeah, so that's Northern Realms. Overall, I think probably the faction that has got the worst new cards. But again, I think I'm most excited for Leticia. I'm really, really looking forward to playing this card for sure. Monsters next. Bleeding Effigy Organic. 4 provisions. Obviously, Organic has a little bit of synergy in that you can tutor it with one of the crones. Also in Araka Swarm, this card is going to be getting that extra drone, so maybe a bit of support there, but it's going to be banishing a bronze unit from your opponent's graveyard, then boost an allied unit by its power. So, for example, something like a Great Sword, this could play for 10 points. That's pretty cool. Have to say, you'd be obviously loving this card against Skelega, Bear Witches being there as well, Fish Flappers. It's going to be a nice 7 for 4 with the Organic tag. So that's already a great start, but it gets better, because if you control Bloody Mistress or Gurnikora, you may target gold units. Now, there's a card we're going to be looking at a little bit for SK, Melusine. This card can get ridiculously big, so I'm going to be certainly on the first few days of the expansion playing Bleeding Effigy. My opponent's going to be trying to Sig Drift for their Melusine, but guess what, mate? I'm going to Bleeding Effigy you now. There is, of course, the ability for your opponent to recognize this is coming, because they see the Bloody Mistress played, and then it's going to take another turn before you can play the Bleeding Effigy. So when you play your Bloody Mistress, they might just respond with Sig Drift. And of course, you do want to get your Bloody Mistress down often when you have Sabbath as well. So maybe it's not going to be the easiest thing to use your Bleeding Effigy on a Melusine, but it's definitely possible. I really like this card. I think in a tournament setting as well, I could see this definitely finding a place in a faction or in a setup where you just want to ban Skelega. So definitely above not popping off. Calm, I think, would be fair, But I think just for like, I can see it being used in tournaments, particularly if you're trying to target Skelega and things like that. I can see this card just being really bloody good. The fact that it's just going to be so many points against SK10, 8 points consistently, without the need to set it up with Gurnakora. Very excited. Obviously, you could use this thing on E-Gurn as well and stuff like that. I'm going to put it in the banger tier because I do think that the Gurnakora Bloody Mistress does look like a great card too, but we'll talk about her quite soon. Up next we have Self-Eater. It is a 6 power, 6 provision card. Often 6 provisions quite difficult to fit into your deck because it's obviously costing you 2 provisions compared to a 4 provision bronze card. So if you've got 2 6s over 2 4s, that's 4 provisions you could be investing elsewhere in the deck. It has the relic tag, which obviously we know has a lot of support. We know how good Koshti decks are, and it has an order of half this unit's base power, then spawn a copy with the same base power on this row. So if you play this card and then you don't play any relics, you click it the next turn, it's going to halve. You can have 2 3 strength cards, but whenever you play a relic, it increases its base power by 1. So you're going to play the Self-Eater, you're going to click it, you can have 2 3 strength cards, you play a relic, and bang, you've got 2 4 strength cards. And then guess what? The next turn you can click it again, and suddenly you've got 4 Self-Eaters, which are going up every single time you play a relic. This can get out of control real quick. I think this card is really bloody good. I'm going to put it right at the top of Banger. Now, when I'm comparing this card to some of these others, I may be beginning to think we might have to move these cards down slightly. But I think if I compare them to other cards that are in the game already, compared to their faction, these are lower banger cards. This card is really good. It's not quite absolute geezer tier, but I still think these other cards are pretty damn cool. So banger for Self-Eater, but I do think it's quite a bit better than these. Just when I think about the fact that these are 4 provisions, you've got to bear in mind, right? That's a very important thing to remember. A 4 provision card, if it's good, you can suddenly put it in so many decks, right? So, yeah, Self-Eater is going to be more deck specific, whereas these other cards you can maybe just put into many decks. But up next, Mamuna, you're going to banish a bronze unit, which would be the Gankian at 9 points. But you, in fact, play it. I was right. I'm getting very confused. This card confuses me. So to confirm this card, Mamuna, you're going to have a Gankian in your graveyard. It's going to go to 11 points if you have Sabbath. And you obviously have the relic pocket, which you would only need 1 relic on the board because this is a relic. If you've got a Self-Eater, that would be perfect. That's the other thing about Self-Eater. It does give you that relic pocket instantly for Gankians, which is really bloody cool. So Mamuna, if you've got the Gankian, 1 in grave, 1 in deck, it plays for 11 points, plus the other 9, which is going to be 20 with relic synergy. This card is absolutely amazing. Right at the top of absolute geezer tier. Wow, what a great card. Important to bear in mind, you do need 1 in the graveyard, 1 in the deck. So it does take a little bit to set up. You can also use this with, of course, the Self-Eater itself. You could replay a Self-Eater, and then you could play 1 from your deck. That sounds pretty bloody good too. So really excited to see Mamuna in action. Finally, last but certainly not least, we have Bloody Mistress or Gurnakora, another relic, 10 provisions, 7 power. Sabbath, at the end of your turn, spawn Gurnakora's fruit on both sides of this unit and transform self into Gurnakora. Gurnakora's fruits being 1 strength thrive tokens that you play from Fruits of Iskith, and the Gurnakora that it transforms into, at the end of your turn, transform self into Bloody Mistress. But if you've got Sabbath, then at the end of your turn, boost self by 1 for each allied Gurnakora's fruit. So if both your Gurney's fruits stick, it's going to be boosting itself for 2 points per turn. And of course, you spawn the 2 Gurnakora's fruits as well, which are going to thrive and do all sorts. Now, this card already is really bloody good. But when you consider Karantha into this card, it goes into absolute geezer tier. Because Karantha is going to set this to 1 power. But if you've got Sabbath, it can just transform instantly, meaning that you're basically playing the Gurney, but for 4 points more because of the Karantha. Also, your Karantha could thrive any fruits or any thrive cards that you have on the board already. It's a relic. It's really bloody good. It's a great card. Also, something else that you could do with this card is play Idaran, right? You could transform your Bloody Mistress with Karantha and Idaran, where you would get 2 Bloody Mistresses at the same time. Then you're Idaran and you would spawn all sorts of Gurney's fruit. Of course, you're going to have overswarming as a massive issue there, but you could also just get like a lot of points very quickly. Imagine doing that in round 1. You're just committing your Karantha. You would still have Bloody Mistress for a later point. You could really do some filthy things. Also, if you fluctuate between Sabbath and not having Sabbath, you would have, maybe with a consume or some movement, you would have the option of spawning more fruits by transforming Bloody Mistress into Gurney, getting 2 fruits, changing it back, and then the next turn getting Sabbath again. You would get an extra 2 fruits, which would then mean your Bloody Mistress is boosting by 4 points your Gurney, that is. So yeah, really great card. Monsters, very, very good. All of them in banger or above. I think all their cards are great. Maybe you could knock this down into the calm category. I think there's definitely an argument for that. I think when you compare it, I think to the other monster cards, it does seem like the worst one. But yeah, monster set looking very exciting indeed. All right, and we're starting off with the Elven Seer in Scoia'tael. I have to say, massive fan of the Elven Seer. It's an elf, it's a mage. Whenever you target this unit with a bronze special card, spawn and play a copy of that special card. This is extra points, of course, on to your Gourd. If you play this in Nature's Gift, you can get extra symbiosis value. You can do all sorts with this with spell cards as well. With Alza, you can get some really cool synergy where you could play Alza for value on deploy. Love this card. A Glace as well could make use of this. All sorts of things that you can do. A Glace maybe not so much, but with the Orb of Insight as well, there's all sorts of just crazy chains you can do, and a Glace definitely could. I'm putting this card in banger. I'm going to put slightly below the Self-Eater, but yeah, really excited for this card. Honestly, I think one of the most slept on cards in terms of combos and interesting things you can do. I think this is going to be a bit of a crowd favourite. Come expansion drop in a couple of weeks, there's going to be all sorts of fun decks you can do with this. Just alone with a Swallow Potion, it's already playing as like a 10-point card. With the Mahakam Forge new ability with Tempering as well, you get instant value, turn your Tempering into a 10-point card. Love it, love it, love it, love it. Alright, Orb of Insight next. Honestly, Orb of Insight is the most interesting card in the whole expansion to me, I think, because it can do all sorts of really cool things. You play it for 2 points, and you give 2 vitality, 2 boost, 2 vitality, so 4 tempo, but then it goes to the graveyard, of course, but when it's in the graveyard, you remove the counter by 1 whenever you play a special card. And when the counter reaches 0, you play this card and give it doomed. So, you can chain this card like crazy. If you play 2 Orb of Insights back to back as well, 1 Orb of Insight when it replays from the graveyard is going to trigger the other one. So in theory, you could go like Alza, you could play like something like a Sorceress to play a spell card or a nature card, whatever it might be, into the Elven Seer. But you could play Sorceress, get her to 6 points, play an Orb of Insight with the Sorceress, right? Which could then trigger your Orb of Insight. You could play on the Elven Seer, which is triggering more Orbs of Insight. So your Gourd's getting huge. You could have an Alza on the board, which for every spell card is triggering symbiosis value maybe as well, if you go a different route. There's just all sorts of things you could do. So I love this card. I'm putting it in the banger tier. I'm actually tempted to put this in absolute geezer tier just for the design. Maybe in terms of power level, it doesn't deserve to be up here, but I've already got Leticia up here. I'm not just doing this on power level, I'm doing this on how cool I think the cards are. This is why Verification is up in banger, and this card to me just seems like there's so much you can do with it, and I'm really excited. Up next, one of the most controversial cards. After speaking to Trinet with this card, the counter maybe works slightly differently to how people expect. It's a spell card, a high-end spell card for Alza is really cool. Obviously, you've got Fran, so there's potential of playing this card twice as well with Francesca if you wanted to commit Fran early game. Boost allied unit by 6. At the end of the turn, if this card is in your graveyard, transform self into the token, which I'm not going to attempt to pronounce. And the token is a 3 power card. While in your graveyard, remove a counter whenever you play a special card. When the counter reaches 0, summon self from your graveyard to the ranged row. So the way this is going to work, the first time this is in your graveyard, you're going to need to play 3 spell cards, or just special cards in fact, which obviously Orb of Insight can trigger twice, for example, and Neuromancy. The Seer is going to help you get that as well. So it's really quite easy to get there. I think a lot of people are overlooking how difficult it is to get the counter down. And it's then going to, therefore, if you could play 3 special cards after this in round 1, this card would play for 9 points in round 1, which is a point less than Chrome Mother plays for, of course. But the way this then works is, I believe, if the counter is at 0, it's going to go into your graveyard and the counter will stay at 0, I do believe. Maybe I'm mistaken on that, but when you play a spell card, my understanding is that it's going to come flying back out after one spell card. I'll have in the description if that isn't true, I'll let you know in the comments, but my understanding is that you would only need to play one spell card the second time you're trying to, or special card the second time you're trying to summon this. So working a really similar way to Crow Mother. I think a lot of people are underestimating this card. I have a suspicion it's going to be in the banger tier. I think on paper, you can look at this at first and put it in calm. But if you can get access to this early, which you often can, you're going to probably want to play Neuromancy in these kinds of decks with spell cards. I think this card could be really bloody good. And if you do get the opportunity to play this twice for Fran, there's a lot of carryover working in a similar way to things like the Ship in Syndicate, Maddock. All these kinds of cards that can play as carryover in multiple rounds are really quite good cards. So I'm going to put this in the banger tier. Honestly, I could actually see it moving up a bit. I'm going to put it above Verification. I really love this card, I have to say. Again, might not be the best on paper in terms of raw power level, but I still think it's good in the right deck. And we'll have to wait and see, mate. I think if it works like that, that's going to be a big difference, right? If you just have to play one special card, that will make a big difference. All right, up next, last but flipping certainly not least, Simlas. Deploy, play all copies of a bronze special card from your deck. I'm talking Lacerate, I'm talking Bone Talisman, Swallow Potions even, Adrenaline Rush, Thunder's Rebukes, Bombs. You could play the Poison Bomb as well, right, for multiple poisons. Simlas, all sorts you can do with this card. He's also an elf. You could also, of course, play 2 spell cards, such as Orb of Insight. That's going to be another really interesting one that you could do. Chaining this with Orb, with things like Sage on the board, is where things can get really scary. This card is right at the top of absolute geezer tier. You can even do some fun things of Waylays. It is an elf, of course, as well, so it's going to trigger your scenario. It's going to contribute to things like Isengrim and Yaven. So yeah, across the board, great card. Really bloody good on its own and just as like a mid-rangey card, but also with other synergies, it just becomes incredible. Love it. Skelega is up next, and we have a really cool set. One of my favorites, I think, overall. The Hermit, I've seen quite a lot of people not that impressed by. We've got 2 Druids, an Alchemy Card, and a High-End Beast, so lots of variety. Seeing a 4-provision Druid instantly, guys, is very important. If you look at Gedineth as a scenario, it doesn't have any 4-provision cards to trigger it with. Masquerade Ball has Hunters. You've got Siege, which has Ballistas and Siege Ladders. So having a Druid at 4 provisions is really bloody important. It's a 7-point card, working in a similar way to a Fish Flapper. It's not a Fish Flapper off Portal, though. Fish Flapper Portal's still the way. But you could definitely make an argument that this card is just better than a Fish Flapper when played from hand. And it's a Druid, which is really bloody cool. It's also got some synergy with the Singer that we're going to look at in a minute, because this is going to be healing itself automatically. One thing worth knowing, I'm not 100% certain on, is this is going to damage the unit to the right by 1 and then heal self by 2. If this isn't damaging a unit to the right, like if you just play it to the far right of the road, does it still heal itself? If it does, that means it's just going to play as a 5 on deploy, and it's then going to heal itself up to 7 quite quickly. I think this card is really bloody good. I'm putting this right at the top of banger tier. Honestly tempted to put this in the absolute geezer tier, I have to say. In fact, I am. I'm going to be controversial. I think a Druid for 4 provisions that's at 7 and has healing synergy with the Singer, I think it's great. I'm really, really impressed by this card. Again, is it as good as like these high-end gold cards? No, but it's 4 provisions, guys. It's really important to remember a 4-provision card is inherently good, and this might not be pushed in the Reckless Flurry decks that we currently see, but this is a card that can push a different archetype, right? Cards like Druids, Alchemy, all these sorts of things need these kinds of cards, and this is a great card in those kinds of decks. That is exactly what the deck wants. I'm putting it in the geezer tier, mate. I think this card is great and is really supporting an archetype that needs good 4-provision cards. Up next, Singer, another fantastic Skelega card. Okay, 4 power, 5 provisions. Deploy, heal an allied unit by 2. The first time you heal an allied unit during your turn, spawn a Deafening Siren on this row. So you can instantly heal something like the Hermit, okay, which you could then damage down with the Priest, which is another great Druid. And if you heal this Hermit instantly on deploy, this card plays as an 8. If you heal anything by 2, 8 points of healing. You get the heal of 2 points, the 4-point body, and you spawn a 2-point Deafening Siren. It's also a Druid and a Cultist. Again, the Druid for Gedineth, the Cultist for Melusine. This card is a fantastic bloody engine. Again, just what this faction needs to promote other decks that aren't just mid-range flurry. This card is going very high up the absolute geezer tier. It's not a gold card, but for a bronze card, quite fantastic. Really looking forward to using it. Again, another Druid, so Gedi support, Cultist, so helping Melusine. Really love this card. Really, really high ceiling. This can be 10 points after just a couple of turns. 2 points per turn if you've got the right healing. The synergy with the Fish Flapper as well means you can play both Fish Flappers and Hermit from hand in this without a portal. But who knows, maybe you'll even still want to slip a portal in there, because a Hermit is still decent off portal. Okay, it's not a Fish Flapper, but both these cards can play for Singer synergy, but also, you know, you've still got a 14-point portal, which is nothing to scoff at. Not sure I see portal being the motive, because I do think you're going to value the healing. You're going to want to play 2 Singers and then just double Fish Flapper, double Hermit. I can see that being the way to go. Up next, we have an Alchemy card, Offering to the Sea. Remember, of course, we've got Bride of the Sea, who can replay Alchemy cards. So having good Alchemy cards is really great for rain-focused decks. And we already know Melusine is supporting rain. Geddy as well with Druids and stuff like that. You've got Fulmer, which supports rain. So having more Alchemy cards is really exciting for Rage of the Sea as well. But Bride of the Sea, 7 provisions means that she's not too difficult this card's not too difficult to replay with Bride of the Sea. You just need 3 turns of rain, which with Rage of the Sea, pretty easily to do. Damage all units on the battlefield by 1, then spawn a Deafening Siren on a random allied row and boost self by the number of allied targets. Guys, this card is absolutely nuts, because imagine the Singer synergy, for example. It's going to knock down your Hermits, all those sorts of things. You might have Armor. If you imagine the synergy this has with Armor Up, the raid card, it would damage all your 1 strength Witcher students, and for every unit on your side of the board it damages, you're boosting a Deafening Siren. You could then also play something like a Mentor, because your Witcher students are still alive. Your Mentors in SK can get to an incredible amount of points with this card. But not only does it support that kind of a deck, it's an Alchemy card, so it's going to fit well into Alchemy decks. It's got synergy with Dagger. Wow, I just love this card. It punishes as well decks which are going wide. I love this card. I'm putting in absolute geezer tier as well. I think this is just a really bloody good card. I think it's really cool. It's just never going to disappoint. It's always going to play for good value. The fact that you can play it with the Skelega Mentors, with Leo, Vesemir, Armor Up, really bloody exciting stuff, because it's also got an Alchemy card. Just again, a perfect example of a card which is supporting multiple archetypes. The Hermit and the Singer really support this Druid archetype, and then the Offering is supporting these 2 archetypes, and also that sort of all-in Witcher archetype as well, because I do think it's a card you're going to want to play in combination with Armor Up, with Leo, Vesemir, and of course the Mentors, which have just been waiting in Skelega to be really, really good. So love this card. Banger. And Melusine. Wow. Jason Sama hinted at this card in my stream 2 months ago. Of course, we've seen people praying to Melusine in the recent drop from the Price of Power that we already saw. What was it called? Once Upon a Pyre. Melusine, Beast, Veil, 7 power, 10 provisions. Order, spawn rain on an enemy row for 2 turns, then damage self by 2. Okay, so you're spawning 1 set of rain and damaging self by 2. So not getting any value, but again, the rain synergy with Offering to the Sea, setting up Bloodthirst, all sorts of things, Fulmer as well. At the end of your turn, damage adjacent units by 1, then gain 1 power for every unit damaged. So if you've got 2 cards next to this you can damage, its base power is increasing, which is of course really bloody good, because you're damaging things, which has synergy with Singer, but moreover as well, you're also going to be getting carry. So if you can Sig Drift for this, you could Hjalmar this even, right? Just all sorts of cool things. It has a Veil, so it could never get doomed as well. You could Sig Drift for it, and then you could even Hjalmar it after you Sig Drift for it if you really wanted to, right? If you wanted to double down on the carryover, Sig Drift, and then you could use Bride of the Sea to replay Sig Drifter with this thing as well, right? So you could play this into all 3 rounds in theory with Bride of the Sea, Sig Drifter, which is a great Alchemy card as well. So really love to see. And of course, if the unit is a cultist, which includes the Singer, includes the Hermit, I do believe, as Foulblood Priest as well is a cultist, and that's a card you love to damage because it's going to be going so tall. You refresh its order and you get more rain. What a card, mate! I love it. So good, so interesting, a huge powerhouse card. I'm going to put this right at the top. Maybe it's slightly worse than these other cards, so maybe we'll put it down here. Love the card, though. Again, really, really getting people to push their deck building around an all-in archetype. It kind of is a little bit similar to Foltest in a way where it's, if not answered in round 1, it's going to be getting you carryover, but I don't think it's as dominating as Foltest. And if you don't answer this, I don't think it's like you lose the game. You have counters, things like Squirrel, Bleeding Effigy is another one we've seen, and Heatwave, of course, just deals with this straight away, whereas Foltest puts points into other things like the commandos as carryover. If this gets heat wave, you lose all your carryover. So it's nowhere near as oppressive as Foltest, but that doesn't mean the card isn't good. So I think comparing any card to Foltest looks kind of bad. So I love this card. Really, really cool. Yeah. All right. So after our reshuffle, we're going to move on to Syndicate. We said Northern Realms has arguably one of the worst sets, but maybe Syndicate's a contender for that too. Scapegoat, first of all, 7 power, 4 provisions. It's going to be a nice portal target. Deploy. If there's no bounty on the battlefield, damage self by 3. Whenever an enemy unit with bounty is damaged, heal self by 1. Okay, so it's actually working in a similar way to the Fish Flapper, in that it's a card that can heal itself, and it's a portal target. So that's really interesting. Portal in Syndicate is something that hasn't been particularly good in the past. Arena Ghoul, also 7 provisions, but this is just an objectively better portal target. That's really relevant because already Ignatius Hale, who we'll talk about in a little bit, I'm looking at Hyperthin as maybe an option. He rewards you for playing some bounty cards. This card is a bounty card. It's kind of like carryover as well. This is another big tool card that you could play on maybe a Hyperthin deck, right? I wonder if Hyperthin Syndicate could be a fun deck we could try out. However, if we look at it outside of Portal, I don't think this card is doing much. I'm going to put it in Calm just because it's one of the best portal targets in the game. Theoretically, maybe the second best portal target in the game, behind the Fish Flappers, right? Because it's got that heal ability. You could also say something similar to this card as well, being in that because it can heal, but it's got Fish Flappers that you play from Portal already. Syndicate, this is definitely the best portal target now in Syndicate, and yeah, I'm going to put it in the Calm. Outside of Portal, I don't see it being very good, but that is relevant. Even if it proves not to be relevant right now, like if Syndicate Portal doesn't prove to be good, down the line, it can definitely be good moving forwards. This card's really hard to evaluate. It's a crime card, which is profit 5 while in your graveyard, damage an enemy unit by 1. When you place a bounty on it, counter 3. So you play it in round 1 for 5 profit. Let's say you're going second. You play it as just 5 profit, uninteractive, but then you could be applying 3 bounties in round 3, and then you would get 3 damage on it. But it's not just damage on, because it's damage on bounty, which is, you know, helping you to kill that card and get coins. So card's kind of difficult to evaluate. It's not one I'm super excited about. I think I'm just going to put it in the Calm category, but I could see it being better. It's not going to be a deck card like in a mid-rangey kind of deck, but again, I wonder if it's like something you could play in this hyper thin Line Pockets deck that I've got in my mind, because let's not forget in Line Pockets it's 6 profit. I think it's a cool card. If you compare it to Eavesdrop, Eavesdrop puts a card at the bottom of your deck, so it's sitting in its profit 5, whereas this is carrying over in, rather than consistency, it's carrying over in actual points. Hard to evaluate. I'm going to put it in Calm, but I do think it's got potential. Next we have Ignatius Hale, a 12-point card. Again, hyper thin. Does seem kind of tempting. You've already got Penance. Of course, Yennefer and Triss both got buff recently. You've now got Scapegoat off Portal. Both of these cards synergizing with Bounty to some extent as well. Deploy. Damage this unit by its tribute cost. Tribute 9. Cancel the deploy ability. Whenever you place a bounty on an enemy unit, reduce this unit's tribute cost by 1. So it's in potentially a 12 for 6, which is obviously great. Really bloody good. You look at Berengar, he's a 9 for 6, sorry. But of course, in he can be better if you play Leo Vesemir. Ignatius Hale, again, Witch Hunters, if Tamara gets buffed, the Witch Hunter tag could be useful, but at the moment it's not, so that's a little bit of a shame. If you're going all in on Bounty, card's going to be good and going to be worth it, so I'm going to put him in the Calm tier, because I'm not sure you want to go all in on Bounty necessarily. There's so many other good cards. If you compare it to Tunnel Drill, if you compare it to things like Horson's Freak Show at 7 provisions, it does seem kind of difficult, Saul, to include this card, but the card's good. In a similar way to Confession Extractor, it's going to push an all-in Bounty deck, which you could say, especially you gave like this Hermit, this Melusine, like these cards up here, like the Geezer tier, because they're an Orb really pushing like specific archetypes. But I just feel like Skelega has better, Syndicate, has better mid-range options. You look at Scoia'tael, it's not in the meta at the moment, so a Druid deck is not an option, but these are really pushing a Druid deck for Skelega. This is not in the meta. Orb of Insight really pushing a different kind of Scoia'tael deck. Whereas like Bounty type mid-rangey decks are already in the meta and they're bloody good. So are these cards good enough to break the mold of what is arguably one of the best factions, or arguably the best faction? Probably you would say it is Syndicate, as it gets banned so often in competitive play. Probably not. That's why they're lower down. When you look at them objectively and you compare them, they're kind of good. But it's important to compare them to what else is in the faction, because that's what they're competing for to get into decks. These cards have worse cards to compete for in the decks they're going to play for, whereas these have pretty bloody good cards already. So that's why we're down in calm. Up next, the Scoundrel. I've seen a lot of people talking about the Scoundrel and being a bit worried. Again, Syndicate has bloody good cards, guys. You've got Horson, you've got Professor, you've got Siggy, you've got Philippa. An incredible amount of cards already to compete. 12 points, 10 provisions, deploy, summon the top bronze unit from your opponent's deck to the opposite row, then place a bounty on it. Mill in Syndicate? I think it's time we do a mean mill Syndicate deck. We've done Northern Realms, we've done monsters. You can use Mandrake on this, mate, for double mill. So mill Syndicate. It's going to be terrible, but worth the YouTube video if nothing else. But if you use Tribute 2, you get to choose which bronze unit you summon and place a bounty on it. And then it has fee of 1, damage the enemy unit with bounty by 1. So I don't know if this is just the unit you can spend with, or if any unit with bounty this turns into a spender. So having a high-end spender kind of compares to Jacques, but it's a little bit cheaper. I really like this card. A lot of people have been worried about it, but guys, let's not forget that the faction has many other good cards with Horseman. I'm going to put the card into the banger tier around here. In the banger tier, I think. Maybe we could put it up here. Yeah, banger tier. Again, in like a mid-rangey deck, not going to be included. If you go all in bounty, the card's going to be fantastic. Definitely. And I'm excited to try it out. It looks cool. I don't think it's overpowered. I like the vibe of it. The fact they can open up Mill Syndicate, while it will just be a bit of fun, does sound good. And again, it's another 12-point card. So hyper thin Syndicate having like 3 big targets. You can play lots of crimes. Triss and Yen can only hit units, of course. Sounds like a fun deck. Probably not amazing, but sounds like fun. Last but certainly not least, we have Nilfgaard. So starting off with the Thanard Turncoat Human Mage Agent. Agent means it's going to be having a little bit of synergy with Usurper in Devotion, or even Falsiri, who's now 6 provisions. Deploy, give an enemy unit spying, order conspiracy. So if the unit is spying, you can damage it by 1. Whenever an enemy unit gains spy and reduce this unit's cooldown by 1, it has cooldown 2. So on deploy, you give something spying. It has a cooldown order of damage an enemy unit with spying by 1. But whenever something gains spying, the cooldown is reduced by 1. So this turns into a really good engine. Kind of comparable to a Ballista. Of course, a Ballista is going to be damaging once per turn. This isn't. So, you know, you can also just compare it maybe to the... I'm trying to think what it's called. The Elf in Scoia'tael. That has a cooldown. But this also has, like... the deployability of giving something spying, which can be really good. Cards like Coup. I think this card's really cool. I'm going to put this in the banger tier. Again, it's 4 provisions. So, like, in set decks, it's going to be amazing. But it is competing with, I think, better 4 provision cards. I'm going to put it, like, right at the top, I think, a banger. Because you are really... It's not like a mid-rangey card. You are building your deck around this. You've got mid-rangey cards like Tortoise. The Mage Assassins being a key example. As well, Novices, Couriers, Blightmakers. There's other really good cards. Locks. I'm putting in the banger tier because in specific decks it's going to be included, but going to be difficult to justify in like more mid-rangey decks, I think. But I really love this card. Master of Puppets up next. And another agent, another mage. Order sees a bronze human enemy unit. Then move self to the opposite row. Cooldown 2. Okay, so if your opponent's row is full, this can't move, but obviously... It's a seize on a bronze unit minus 10 because it's going to move over to your opponent's side. You also need to time this to do it late in the game, otherwise they can click the order themselves. But if you fill your opponent's row, this is not going to move and you're going to be able to seize multiple units. So this card is going in the banger tier, I think. Definitely, of course, it can brick. It could be a 4-point card. If it's removed, it feels really bad. But the ceiling of this is huge. Imagine this on a priest. Pretty nuts. On like a 7 for 4 as well, the card. Plays for minus 10, but the seize plays for 14 points. So that'll be a 4-point card. So you're really going to need to be seizing like upwards more than 4. But again, with spying synergy, you can fill your opponent's side of the row. You can do things like Megascope. Even a Darren, you can make a 1-power copy of this, filling your opponent's row. Really cool card. I love the design, I have to say. Excited. And Furcat's up next. Another card I just really like, I have to say. I really like Furcat. I'm putting him, again, in the banger tier. He's a mage. He is got some synergy with spying cards. He has synergy in multiple decks. Decks already want to use spell cards and special cards like Invo, DMT, Coup de Grace, of course, being an echo card. You're going to want to play Coup with this as well, most likely with the fact that you're giving spying to things. You could also play this in Hyperthin with Double Maddock. Even in Mill, you could make an argument to play this with Teleportations and Imperial Diplomacies and Assimilate. Just seems like a really cool mid-rangey card. Not that exciting, but honestly, the fact that it can fit into so many different decks, I think is really cool. And I already think Nilfgaard has probably the most deck diversity possible out of all the factions, and Furcat can just fit into a lot of things. I really love it. So yeah, I'm honestly tempted to put him in the absolute geezer tier, but because he's maybe not as exciting as like things like the Orb, he is just working in a similar way to like a Dandelion Poet. That's the only reason he's in the banger tier. I do think the power level of this card is pretty damn good though. He can brick as well. There's maybe an argument that he could play like artifacts if you ever wanted to play Megascopes, but let's be fair, you don't play many artifacts a lot of the time unless you're playing Cloggers or Masquerade Balls. So yeah, really cool card though. Last card of the set is Artword Terranova. Human Mage, Assimilate. Deploy, spawn and play a copy of any non-disloyal unit you gave spying to during this game, excluding self. So imagine you give spying to your opponent's Brathans. You can play Artward onto Brathans, which would just play as a Brathans plus a 4-point Assimilate NG, which is obviously already growing by 2, so it would be 6 points already plus on Brathans. This card is nuts, incredibly good. Really, really love this card. I'm going to put it like right at the top. Maybe it's more difficult to fit into like mid-rangey decks, again, because you do require synergy to set this card up and get value off of it. But I think the card is really quite exciting. I've also got to confess that I do think you could use this in a mill deck. Maybe with Operator Brathans, bring those kinds of cards back. Because if you Operator, for example, a Kingslayer, you could then Artward into Kingslayer, which is kind of funny. You would have, it would play as like 9 tempo, but obviously you've got the Assimilate engine. Then it would allow you to play Brathans, which again is more Assimilate. You would play Vigo as well. Things like Furcat could synergize with Teleportation, as I mentioned. The Turncoat could fit into the deck as well. So I'm kind of tempted to try a mill deck. It's not the most logical option for Artward. There's many ways you could go, but yeah, I just really like the card. I'm a big fan of the Nilfgaard set. So to summarize, let's look. Northern Realms kind of getting the worst 2 cards. And again, even though these are in the stinker tier, I do think that moving forwards, particularly this card on the left, could be really bloody good. Practice makes perfect. Not popping off a couple of cards. You could make arguments to put these, a lot of the cards that are in Calm down there, but I like this as a portal play. I think this card is probably underrated if the counter works in the way I said. The Bear, just the fact that there's some new ways of dealing with artifacts that aren't just Heatwave, and it can play as a 10-point card on a Megascope on your own side is pretty cool. This card's good. Again, this card's kind of hard to evaluate. I could see it maybe being at the lower of card. Honestly, maybe this card could be at not popping off, but I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt that a 12 for 6 is good in a deck that you really want to build around. In at Banger, Master of Puppets, Aretuza Student, kind of being on the weaker side. The Sage, just really interesting, I think, with Forge, with things like Swallow Potions, Orb of Insight, Alza, Francesca, all sorts going on. Also the Sorceresses with a Glace. There's just so many cool things this card opens up. Leticia, I think, is the most exciting card from the Northern Realms expansion. I was tempted to put her in the higher level. She's not going to be a mid-rangey card, though. You are going to have to build around her. Are the cards she works with good enough for her to be seeing competitive play? We'll have to wait and see, but I do think this card is good enough on her own. There's some cool things you can maybe do with Viraxis with this card as well. Offering to the Sea just looks amazing. Artward, just Furcat, rather nice. Nice little bit of synergy there. You've also got the Self-Eater looking good. This is just a value card, right? Self-Eater just looks powerful. This card looks powerful. 4 provision cards are always good. They're nice and cheap. You can include them. And then in the absolute geezer tier, the Orb looks amazing. This card is exactly what a Druid's deck needs. It's got the Cultist tag. It's damaging itself, so it's got the healing synergy. Melusine as well just looks like a powerhouse. Mamoon is amazing. Gurnikora is great. With Caranthir, it looks frightening. This card looks great. I think I'm going to maybe move him down slightly compared to these other cards. And then Simlas, just consistent point slam. And also has synergy in elf decks, spell decks. I love it! All across the board, I love it. I do feel bad about putting these cards down in Stinker because I don't think they deserve it. Really, it's just because, you know, we want to use all the roads. We want to really evaluate these cards fairly. And these are, in my opinion, the 2 worst cards from the set. and so I do think it's fair to put them down there because some cards have to go in stinker, and I think it's a credit to CDPR that there's not really any cards that stand out as being completely terrible, even though these Northern Realms cards can be great, and I'm excited to try them, really looking forward to playing them. I really still think they're going to be a lot of fun. They are down in the lower tier just because, you know, something has to go in the stinker tier, and I do think these cards aren't going to see any competitive play moving forward. So yeah, there's the tier list. Let me know, guys. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Obviously, we shuffled it around at points. Very excited for this expansion. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Like the video. And yeah, please comment. What do you agree and disagree with? And is there a card you're most looking forward to? A kind of deck you would most like to see on the channel in the coming days? Because there's going to be all sorts coming. Thanks again. Nice one. Deuces.